Okay, we're live on YouTube now. Popo, you can start whenever you're ready, either by introduction or other form you think appropriate, and I will start letting people in now.
Cool.
Popo, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Okay, hello everybody, and thanks for joining us today and joining us for the conversation celebrating Duan Wu Jie, Dragon Boat Festival. And firstly, I want to wish everybody a happy festival, happy Duan Wu Jie, and welcome also two of our guests and two old friends of mine. So firstly, I wanted to introduce Doris Young, and Doris was born in San Francisco in 1977 and raised in Hong Kong and California. She has been writing and directing films in China, Europe, and the US, and graduated from University of California, Los Angeles, and Beijing Film Academy's degree of art history and directing. And her feature film, including Mother Country and Taxi Stories, and also documentary Ugly Model. And this time we are showing her short movie called Red Light. And when Young was born in 1971 in Canada, Edmonton, to a Chinese migrant family. He moved to Vancouver in 1994, and where he became established as a writer, performer, and video artist, exploring issues of race, identity from queer Chinese Canadian perspective. And in 2021, he arrived in Germany, living in Hamburg, Cologne, and before settling in Berlin. In addition to his artistic practice, also being active as a curator, organizing screenings event in North America and Europe. Since his first video release in 1994, he has traveled intensively to present his work at film festivals all around the world. And today we showed his film, his short movie made in 2001 called My German Boyfriend. And plus, sorry, forgot to introduce that Doris is now based in Amsterdam. And I didn't realize that actually Doris moved to Amsterdam in 2002. And she also worked as a curator and funded Cinema Asia in Amsterdam. So all these numbers, all this data looks like we are all coincidentally connected. But with narratives, I met both of them in 2011 in Beijing. It was exactly 10 years ago, actually in June, right? When we invited Doris to curate a film series, a film section in our festival about overseas Chinese. And today we often mention about Chinese diaspora. And now I also live. So I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Popo Fan. I'm a creator for this event, for the screening today. And I'm since 2017, I'm based in Berlin. So when I contacted Doris about this screening, Doris was telling me, "Oh, you are also a Chinese diaspora yourself." So our topic will be on diaspora identity and queer identity, and how we can survive, how we can continue our creativity as people of color under the situation right now. Firstly, my first question is before we open to the audience, I will have a few questions to both of them, and then we will open to the Q&A section. And so if you have a question if you're already in the Zoom room, you can type your question into the chatting box already. And if you are watching live from YouTube, you can just type your question on YouTube, and our collaborator from Montage Play will bring the questions to us. And I also forgot to thank Guo and Mia from Montage Play hosting this event. So my first question is actually to both Doris and Wing, and both of you both of you grew up in North America, if I can say that, with a background experiencing being Asian, queer, diaspora in North American. And even though both in North America and Europe, being Asian queer is a minority identity, but have you, what has been different? Has it been different when you moved to Europe from North America?
Doris, do you want to start?
Yeah, so I think I moved to Europe in 2002. And at the time, I think what really struck me the biggest difference for me was that even though I grew up in the United States, I grew up in California. And when I was young, of course, there was not a lot of Asian people, but as I got older, and especially when I was in university, being in Los Angeles, there was a lot of Asian diasporic culture, food. Like I think I was very, in a way, very lucky or very spoiled in a way to, yeah, you almost sometimes feel like you're in a different country in Asia. And, you know, we just go into a different neighborhood. You're in like Thai town, or in Koreatown, or like Monterey Park. And then when I went to Amsterdam in 2002, I was almost like shell shocked that none of the Asian community or people were really visible. Like you didn't see them on the street. There was a few kind of Chinese restaurants, but all the Chinese people were hidden in the restaurants. And it was actually, I felt like how I felt when I was young in the United States, when I first immigrated or re-immigrated, because I was born there from Hong Kong. When I was the only Chinese kid in the class, I felt a little bit like that again when I first went to Amsterdam in 2002, that, oh, it's like I'm the only Asian person around again. Yeah, for me, mostly it was also, of course, a lack of camaraderie and community with other Asians, but also lack of Asian food. And yeah, I actually then, that's actually how I started my film festival, is I was so kind of lonely for Asian community that I sought out Asian, because I was a filmmaker, and I sought out other Asian filmmakers from around that I knew, and most of them were outside, like in North America, Hong Kong, and so on, like for example, Kit Hong. And then I was like, oh, there's nothing happening here. Maybe I can organize some screenings of your films. And then that's, in a way, that's how I started the festival, because I wanted to build community, which I was lacking here. So maybe that also answers a couple of your questions.
Yeah, I mean, I can really relate to that. I grew up in Canada, and there was often, in my school, there's always at least one Asian in every classroom, right? So it's not like we weren't completely around, but we were quite a minor part of the story, minor part of the narrative, or this social image. But then when I moved to Vancouver in 1994, I moved there because I went there for a performance art festival, or for an art festival. And I met a lot of queer Asians for the first time. And I was just amazed to meet these people who were funny and sexy and self-confident and political. And they were talking about a lot of stuff that I never had anyone to talk to about that stuff before. So then I decided to move to Vancouver to be around those people and to have this community around me of of queer Asians, Asian artists, Asian Canadians. Vancouver was kind of like our promised land, our holy land, where there have been Asians there for 5 generations already, and we're a huge part of the population. And you really couldn't walk down any street without seeing tons of Asian faces. And this was in the 90s. And then when I moved to Germany in 2001, it was this shock that suddenly there's so few Asians around. And the few Asians that I saw were kind of like my parents. They just want to keep their heads down, run their restaurants, just survive, pay for the family, pay for the house, pay for the car. But they didn't want to engage in anything like political or critical. But it's now in the past 5 or 6 years that suddenly in Berlin, you see this next generation. It's the kids of those restaurant owners. Those kids have now finished school, have now finished university, and now they are speaking out really loud and proud about all the stuff that they see around them, about the racist stuff. And so they're doing a lot of really interesting activism. But that group is like all in the early 20s, right? And I just found it really amazing, the energy that they have. But it kind of reminds me of when I was in my early 20s as well, right? So it's been interesting to watch this new development, this new generation of German Asians emerging here.
Great, and especially when Doris started talking about food, I feel have such a strong feeling about craving for a lot of food. Honestly, I haven't eaten zongzi. I don't know if anyone in the room had or who is watching YouTube live has eaten zongzi today, because I didn't have it this year. I was I had like 3 streaming events today. I was too busy to go shopping. And also here, if you go to the Asian market, it's like €4 for one zongzi, and it's like like less than $1 in like €0.50 in China. So I would say I'm not craving for that. I don't have to eat that. I will save this money for my film. But then but it was very inspiring hearing both of your experiments regarding the experiments growing up in somewhere that you're not the majority people of color, because for me, I grew up in China. I never really had this awareness before. But my next question will be regarding also when you said you talk about the different generations, and obviously when you say those young kids who are doing for speaking out for Asian representation, I know that a lot of them actually was inspired from you. And I talked with some of them. They know about you. They know your work, know your film. But my question is to both of you that when you grew up, do you have a role model of Asian figure that either doing activism on LGBT issue, or Asian filmmakers that you admired, and also you can see that is someone you learn a lot from?
Wayne, you want to start?
Okay, sure. So my first exposure was in 1993 when I went to that festival in Vancouver, and an Asian lesbian gave me this essay. It was a photocopy of this essay by Richard Fung, and it was called Looking for My Penis, the Gay Asian Man in White Western Porn. And his analysis of the image of the gay Asian man was just an eye-opener for me. Richard Fung is, I don't know, maybe 10 years older than me. He's a generation older than me, kind of, or maybe a half a generation. But he was like the first one in Canada to talk about that stuff as a gay Asian man, as a filmmaker, also as a teacher and as an activist, and to analyze what it meant to be gay Asian in a white society. So he's very much my role model. I think the only one before that for me was Paul Wong, another gay Asian or queer Asian artist in Canada, who's even older. But his work was less politically about being queer Asian. It was more about being Asian than about being queer. So it's more Richard Fung, who is my role model. And when I started making work in 1994, in 95, I started curating work as well. and I would curate programs of queer Asian work. And at the time, there's only about 10 directors in the whole world. And so we all got to know each other because we'd be selected for the same festivals at the same times with the same films. And we would just end up meeting each other at these festivals, and we'd just be put in the same programs over and over again. And we'd realize that there's only about 10 of us in the whole world at that time. So those are kind of my peers. And they're the ones I also look up to, because every time I saw their work, they really inspired me to make new work. I would say the closest one is probably Huang Win, who is in California. He and I were working at the same time and working at about the same pace. Around once a year, we'd each make a new film or a new video. And it was always interesting for me to compare and contrast our work, because he comes from his politics from a very different angle than me. But it was always really exciting and really inspirational to look at his work as well. Doris?
Yeah, just I think I am maybe one generation behind Wayne, but I think my first kind of exposure to queer filmmaking or film was from what the filmmakers he mentioned, and of course Wayne himself. These kind of identity films about queer identity. And at the time, there was only queer male identity films or videos at the time. I didn't see any women ones, but the queer male filmmakers did inspire me. And I think I remember one of the first queer films I saw. It was a short film from Ray Young, who is the director of Suk Sok and Friend Cover. And at the time, I think he was actually in my film school or in my university at UCLA in the film department. And he did a short film for, I think, his thesis film. And I think it was called Yellow Fever. And it was actually like the first film just to see queer Asians on the screen, for me at least. And actually with this, like, really well done, I thought. And it was actually really, to be honest, it really sparked something in me, like, oh wow, like people like us, like on the on the margins, we can be represented on the screen in stories like this. And I thought, oh, maybe there is a career for me out there. Yeah, from then on. Oh, and actually, well, not so much that inspired, but I think, inspired by the career of a friend of mine, Quentin Lee. He and I have very, very different tastes and styles. But he was one of the, at least for me, the first also openly queer filmmakers I know, who was almost militantly outspoken about his views. And he was out there doing a lot of work, especially at that time. So I think watching him make films kind of inspired me also to start making films as well.
Great, and all those inspiration are very important. I found that is it's really important nowadays, because I met a lot of people that told me they were really lacking of role model. They didn't have anyone that being successful in the industry or can represent about the Asian image. And I believe with opportunity like this also can give the next generation more information and more courage to continue their work. But one point I was very impressed from what Doris said, also regarding to the gender issues within the queer community, and how women was represented in the industry, especially Asian women, and recently also being talked a lot. And your film, Red Light, also told a very interesting encounter between female Chinese sex worker and a Dutch guy, and it's called Red Light. I'm going to so if you haven't seen it, you still have a chance. It's going to be streamed on a montage play from 12th until 19th of June, and you pay just $6 of fee, then you can watch 4 films. And by the way, also unfortunately we could not have the director of The Last Lesbian to join us because of time difference, but it's also very interesting film featuring about imagination, about in the sci-fi atmosphere of lesbian story. But for Doris, I want to ask you, I found the dynamic, the relationship between the two protagonists in Red Light is very interesting. We won't leak too much to the audience, so make sure that we'll watch the film itself. But what was the inspiration for you to tell this story? Because we know that you live in Amsterdam, and how do you? I also been to the Red Light district in Amsterdam for a couple of times. It's very overwhelming, and but I was very impressed by a story like what you told. It's very different. It's against a cliche, but somehow also very realistic. So I wonder what inspired you.
Well, there's 2 things that I think inspired me to make the film. One was just all the many years of kind of, what would you call it, kind of institutional racism in a way against Asian women. Like every time, and especially, like I said, when I first moved to Amsterdam, there was very little Asians, and then if someone saw you, they instantly would say ni hao, ni hao, because I think there was a show here or something, and then that's all, but in a way that it wasn't like a really nice thing. It wasn't in like a nice way. And just as an Asian woman, you're always kind of a little bit wary about attention, especially from usually men who give you attention, mostly unwanted attention, catcalling, ni hao, different things, even following you sometimes, or trying to make conversation when you don't want to have a conversation, intruding in your space, things like that. So I think I took all that kind of internalized frustration against this kind of these things, and I put it a little bit into this film. That's into the character of the sex worker, of having to deal with all these men. That's one. And secondly, the inspiration was literally, I was interested in what was happening behind those windows in Amsterdam, behind the windows with the red lights, which is where legalized sex work takes place in Amsterdam, which is very famous, behind these red lighted windows. And it's called the red light district because of that. And Amsterdam, I think, was one of the first countries in the world to legalize sex work. There's still a lot of issues with that, but that's not what we're discussing here today. But what was actually literally the inspiration was that I was hosting some guests from our film festival. I won't say who it was. And they wanted to go to the red light district, as all guests do in Amsterdam. And this guest went there, and then it was actually a she, and she wanted to go into one of the windows because she saw a sign. It said, "Women welcome," and she thought that was kind of funny. And she was bisexual, I guess. Well, not I guess, I know. And she asked me if I could go in with her, and I was like, no, I'll just wait until you're done. And then she's like, no, you have to come. And then so I actually did go in. I just sat in the corner, and I was also charged full price. I found out how much it was. It was like €50 just to watch, even. And then even back then, so they were doing their thing, and then what was very interesting to me, I actually always wondered what happened behind those windows. And when I was in there, I could hear all the other windows, what was happening in other windows. and yeah, in other rooms actually. They're all like rooms interconnected by a hallway in the back actually, and then the front windows where you see the sex workers. So I could hear what was going on in all the other rooms actually, and it wasn't a lot of sex. There wasn't a lot of sex going on actually. I heard no sex going on. All I heard was conversations of men talking about their children, about their work or things like. It was almost like people were going there for therapy. So I was really, really surprised by that, and I thought, oh wow, that's really interesting. And then that's how kind of the idea for that, you don't always go to sex worker for sex. Actually, there are a lot of things you go to sex workers for. So that was a little bit inspiration, combined with the being an Asian woman in Amsterdam, where you're in a country where you're a minority.
And I feel it is also actually meaningful when we think about what just happened a couple of months ago in Atlanta, and attacking Asian women specifically, and also the life of sex worker. I wonder how was the reaction where has been this film showing? I know it has won the audience award in Cinema Asia. Congratulations! And but where else had been showing, and what the reaction from the audience has been? I really think it's deserved to be rewatched by our audience nowadays.
We went through the film festival circuit, and actually I was in Hawaii at the same time. Josh Kim's documentary, the precursor for How to Win at Checkers, was there, and the reaction from, I think, film festival audience was really good. They really understood the whole frustration with being kind of marginalized as an Asian woman, and then an Asian, okay, well, not particularly as an Asian sex worker, but as, let's say, Asian woman. And then we actually opened it up for a short time on YouTube. And in a very short time, we gathered like, I don't know, like several 100,000 views, almost 1 million, I think, in a very short time. And I think most people went there because they saw the title, Red Lights, and they're like, oh, this must be some sex thing, or about prostitutes, or so on. And then I think a lot of people were surprised when it turns out to be actually a film with a story, and there's no sex in it, or well, there is a little bit, yes, actually, not to give it away. But and it was actually very interesting because all were kind of these mostly horny straight guys wanting to see if there was some sex in this Red Lights film on YouTube. And it turned out, and that some of them actually wrote comments on the underneath, like, oh wow, this is not what I expected, but actually it's very touching, or like, oh yeah, I never thought of it that way from the woman's perspective, or I didn't know. Yeah, actually I can imagine, so it was actually quite interesting, the reaction I got on YouTube versus like the film festival audience, which is very politically correct and everything. And of course you got these kind of trolls, right, on YouTube, were like, yeah, like, of course, XXX, like that, I want to do that Asian blah 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 XXX, things you don't want to repeat. And then yeah, so if you look, it's a very interesting comments. It's like a mixture of like really rude comments versus like ones like, oh, this is not what I expected, but it was actually quite kind of okay, to like, oh, I really liked it, or whatnot. So that was really eye-opening versus the film festival audience, which I usually are very generous and very open-minded anyways.
That's very interesting to hear, and it's such a strategy that you, as a filmmaker, I think very often will have to use some other strategy to welcome people, to attract people, and then they some of them might be not, I'll say what that's not what I was expecting, but some of them actually they're able to get the information you want to deliver, and then I have a question to Wayne, and because recently we also have another Q&A, and we're talking about how we can welcome our audience. And one of the strategy is to be funny and to use this comedy attracting people. And how I found a lot of jokes in your films are still very realistic now, talking about Asian stereotype on especially Asian queer men. And how did you find all those jokes, and how did you write your script and telling the story?
Yeah, well, with that one, I actually had to come here to Germany to do the research, right? So that was part of the project, to find out how are Asian men perceived in Germany, but also to find out how I perceive German men, because that's the other half of the story, is like stereotypes about what kind of men are German men, right? And then to put them together, these two kinds of stereotypes. And then in the process, I also discovered another stereotype, which if I sat in Vancouver, I would not know about this, is how Kurdish men, Turkish men are perceived as well. So that is also part of the story, is another ethnicity that we don't even talk about otherwise in Canada. So yeah, I had to do the research here. And for me, it is important to use comedy as entertainment, as a way to attract the audience, engage the audience, and then underneath this comedy, or included in this comedy, I also put my own political commentary. Because I also, have seen other artists who really just stay on the political side, and it's just a lot of politics, politics, politics. And quite often the audience can get bored too, right? Because they're just sitting there being lectured. So I try to combine the two. So some comedy, some sex, and then some politics all mixed in as well.
And I guess that's also the reason why in the later on of the film become a little bit moody atmosphere, and I feel extremely romantic of that moment. And I remember, because this is the first time I watched it in our queer film festival in Beijing, when you and Doris brought this section to our festival, and built up sort of my imagination about Berlin. And being in Berlin being Germany for 20 years is 20 years anniversary of it in Germany now. And what have been seeing had changed of the gay scene, especially with racial issues, and has it been changed a lot the last 20 years?
That's really hard to say. I mean, I've definitely gone through a couple of generations here now, right? So my generation, I'm 50 now. And so my generation is not that much different than it was back then, I would guess. There is the stereotype that as men get older, they become more open to men of color. There are many reasons behind that, possibly. But the younger generation, I'm not so sure. I do feel like the younger generation is perhaps more open to people of color, including Asian men. I definitely get that impression from North America, especially if you watch North American media. 20 years ago, you would never see, for example, somebody kissing the Asian guy on a TV show. But now in North American media, you see that on mainstream TV shows. The Asian guy has a love life, gets kisses, gets sex, right? And it's just as sexy as anyone else on the show. So, and I think a lot of young people grow up with that nowadays. But for older people, like my age or older, we grew up with a media where the Asian men were almost never there on screen. And if they were there, they were often unsexy. Nobody kissed them. Nobody had sex with them. Nobody fell in love with them. And so I think that also has an effect on the audience, that the Asians in the audience feel unsexy, but also the non-Asians in the audience think that the Asian men aren't sexy either, right? So I think that's been changing. I hope it's been changing. And I think the next generation is probably better with that kind of image of Asian men.
This also reminds me about now the mainstream society media is replacing one kind of stereotype with another kind of stereotype, talking about the success of Crazy Rich Asia, or what is the other one? The Bling.
Bling Empire.
Yeah. Bling Empire. Because Doris is also involved. Doris had made documentary about Kevin.
Kreider.
Yeah, so your documentary, and Doris, could you also talk about how the Asian representation regarding to sexuality has been changed recent years in your eyes?
Well, definitely, as Wayne said, in 10, 15 years ago, even that especially Asian. I mean, I did a documentary about Asian masculinity, actually, with Kevin Kreider as about his life, basically, and he's one of the leads on the reality show on Netflix, Bling Empire. Yeah, one reason we did the documentary was because growing up, Kevin, as well as Wayne and other of our generation, we never saw role models, Asian role models, or in TV, television, media, films, as a love interest, as the leading man or woman. It was always a stereotypical representation, and especially for Asian men, there was no Asian masculinity. They were always demasculinized. That was a big problem for a lot of Asian men growing up that I know. And for women, we had a different kind of stereotype, right? That we were like oversexed, always willing to be available for sex, or we were this kind of dragon lady, unapproachable dragon lady. So we had a different kind of stereotype. And also not representative of the diverse the diversity that Asians are. We just had grouped them into these things. So what I feel like there's a change from when I was growing up, and for example when Kevin and Wayne and so on was growing up, is there is a push to put more diversity, including Asian male leads, different types of Asian female characters on the screen now. And that's a lot of what we do at our festival as well. We model our festival after the Asian festivals in the US, to act as a kind of platform for positive, accurate representations of Asians on the screen. And there's Indeed with Crazy Rich Asians, and there's more characters on TV shows now that don't have an accent, or not the sidekick, or not the takeout guy, but still not enough. I think there's not enough people in leadership, behind the scenes, more than there was. Now we have John Chu, also Crazy Rich Asians director, who directed the new film In the Heights. And so there are more people coming up in leadership positions, and in behind and in front of the camera. But here in Europe, just to go back here, it's still very much like it was in the US, maybe 20 years ago, I would say. There's really stereotypical representation in media, takeout guy, dragon lady. And that's actually what we actively try to change with our festivals in Asia, in Holland, because these festivals also helped media in the US change. And because US is such a big market, that in turn affects the whole world. If they see things happening in US, in films, American TV, that kind of goes into the rest of the world. And that's a little bit what I think we're all hoping.
So I was invited to see Asia in 2012, and I was really impressed by the work you have been doing there, making improvement of the representation of the Asian communities in this film in Netherlands. And on the one side, on the other hand, no matter making film festival or making films, this is really hard because we need money. And so this is a topic also about how do they survive? Especially now after the pandemic, a lot of places. I was talking with my friend, and we supposed to celebrate his birthday, but then we all started to complain about the progress being rejected by funding application, and lack of because now seems to be even more people trying to get funding from very little resource. And I wonder how was the progress of for both of you making a movie, and maybe we can start with Doris, because I remember at that time you also did a crowdfunding campaign to fund Red Light, right? And also I wonder how was the progress, and how did you fund your team, or was it difficult to find the location and actors for you?
We actually did do a crowdfunding campaign for Red Lights, and yeah, it was actually my very first crowdfunding campaign. That was in 2012. And it was still relatively new, the crowdfunding thing at the time. We weren't sure if it was going to work or if people were going to donate. But I think people thought the subject was really interesting. And I did a kind of video, like a crowdfunding campaign video, where I went into the red light district and kind of talked about what the film was going to be about. And we also partnered with some of the sex worker organizations. It's called the Red Thread here in Amsterdam. Funding wise, indeed, it's very hard to make a film. And just from getting the funding for it, to making it, to getting it out there to be seen, it's like a long process. And you better have a side gig if you're a filmmaker. And I'll talking about funding, just a little bit of side funding just for film in general and culture for the film festival. When we first started, it was easier to get funding because we're very new and nobody was doing this kind of work, having an Asian film festival. And now, also because of COVID, there's a lot of funding has gone away just because governments are more concerned with keeping the economy going and not the arts and cultural institutions or festivals or things like this going. So all the money is now going to economic recovery, not so much the cultural sector, which has been decimated across the world. Basically a lot of institutions, festivals, and so on probably won't survive, I think, in the coming years. And we also weren't able to put a festival on this year, and we're also doing a crowdfunding. If you like Asian film, please support our crowdfunding later on for Cinemasia. And but for Red Lights, the crowdfunding was quite successful. I forgot what the budget was. I think it was, how much did we raise? Not that much, maybe 3,000-4,000 euro, maybe. But it was a relatively simple film to make. Everything was donated. I think one of the questions was, how did we get the location? We were shooting in the red light district, which is actually very tricky because you're not allowed to shoot in the red light district because not so much because of the government, but because of the privacy of the sex workers, and also because of the pimps. If the pimps see you filming, their sex workers, they will come and smash your camera, basically. So we knew that, and we actually, through a friend who knew a friend who knew someone who one of the owners of the sex shows. It's like this big building, a building in the red light district called the Casa Rosso. It's a live sex show for mostly tourists. And he knew the owner, and the owner said, I asked the owner if I could film in front of his building. And he's like, yeah, no problem, it's okay. And he even gave us like one of his bodyguards or his security people. And then the sex workers and everyone knew all the security people that one guy who was with us. So they're like, oh, okay, they're with the Casa Rosso, it's okay. So that's how kind of we got around filming in the red light district, which is actually technically not allowed for anybody, for tourists, for anybody, because and of course we didn't show anyone's face or anything like that. Yeah, that's in short how we kind of crowdfunded our film and also shot in the red light district.
And what about the cast? Are they professional actors and actresses, or the amateur, or what? And how did you find them?
Well, I mean, there's very few, you know, even now, very few Asian actors in Europe, let alone Holland. Let's say maybe 3 in the whole country. And I was very lucky to find this. She was just kind of Wan Ting is her name. She's an actress in Red Light. She was just starting doing a few short films, and I think she did a short film for our film lab program in our festival, and that's how I knew her. And then and that's how it always goes. Like some Asian people, like, oh, maybe acting is interesting. They'll do like 1 or 2 short films, and then there's no work. So there's no work and there's no support. So then, and also stereotypical roles, which are not interesting. They can never really make a career out of that. So then they stop and then, you know, go to a job that they can earn a living basically, or at least make a career out of it. It's very hard to make a career as an Asian actor in Europe, which I hope can change more towards the American model, where you actually, I do know friends in the US, Asian American actors who actually have a blossoming career because of the changes in the recent 10 years. Wan Ting, she's no longer acting as well. She is now a baker. Yeah.
I would love to try her bread or the bread
yeah.
or that to make.
Really good baker. Yeah, and she does also like she also brews beer because it's the same kind of hops and things in bread and beer, or at least I think in her bread.
It's really hard to say which one which is better choice. It's because I'm also a very foodie, but I have to say it's such a shame because we love her performance and she did a great job in Red Light. And I also tried to see her IMDb and didn't find any other works. So. Yeah. But the topic is so important now, and I remember a few years ago also when I attended Asian Film Festival in Berlin, there was also a panel about if it is when the opportunity trying to find on one hand is when you want Asian actor or actress is very difficult to find, but the fact is because of the industry they have very few opportunity and it's hard for them to survive on acting job, and really hope this, as you said, can be improved. To win, and how was the progress of making My German Boyfriend? And also I figured out that most of your films are quite similar style with can we say low budget or guerrilla style of shooting. What was the choice, and how did you achieve your aesthetic with this kind of shooting style?
Yeah, of my work, mostly my funding, if I got funding, it was from the arts councils in Canada. But that was only maybe 20% of my work was with arts funding. My German Boyfriend was one of the pieces that had arts funding. Otherwise, it was out of my own pocket. And so one of my friends calls this availableism. You use whatever is available. Whatever friends are available, whatever locations are available, whatever equipment's available, and whatever money is available. If you only have $20, then just use $20 and that's it, right? So I like this kind of do-it-yourself, working within your own limits sort of philosophy. But I think it's also was a very different time in the back then. My German Boyfriend, it was near the beginning of the internet age. But a lot of my work was done before the internet age. And so you wouldn't have something like crowdfunding. There was no crowdfunding because there's no internet, right? And equipment used to be much more expensive. We didn't have smartphones. We didn't have phones that could take video. We didn't have film cameras that could take video. You actually had to buy a video camera. And even a small video camera was kind of expensive. And so I think that also gets back to what Doris was saying earlier about, not seeing very many lesbian filmmakers. Part of it was economic. A lot of lesbians did not have the money to buy cameras, right, back then. So when I did my German boyfriend, I did have arts funding, but mostly I still worked in my do-it-yourself style. I prefer to work with amateurs. I think part of it is also with, it is very hard to find Asian actors in the West. Even when there are Asians in the city, a lot of them are too shy to actually do camera work or acting work. And it is true that even if they do want to become actors, it's very hard to survive on the available parts that they get in the media. I do know one guy here in Berlin who's Chinese and I guess he must be about 60 now. But when I met him, he was about 50, and he was about the only one who was 50 years old, Asian. And he was getting a lot of work, but he's the gangster boss or the cook or the victim of a crime. Or maybe they put him on in a suit and he's a Japanese businessman. And so even if you do get work, it can be very unsatisfying because you just play stereotypes over and over and over again, and you don't get to really have an interesting character that develops over time. So then I tend to use a lot of amateurs instead among my friends where possible.
And this is also another question that's I'm fascinated by the term of availability filmmaking. And I remember when I was in film school, or when I just right after I graduated, all those documentaries I shot in China was a one-person team, or sometimes I can have my friend to do the camera work, and it's like I can buy you a dinner or stuff like that. But in China, the industry have been developing really crazily the last few years, and afterward, actually before I moved to Berlin, it was my last film I shot in Beijing was already like I did pay my friend with my own money, but obviously was not a big one. But in the end, they got better paid job, and they abandoned me in the end. I was really, it's on one hand it's understandable, but also it's harmful for my project, and also could also harmful for the friendship. And I don't know if Berlin still have this kind of atmosphere, because now my project here, usually I get some small funding, but still pay people quite little. But then as it started to have conversation with friend, will you still be with me if I pay you little? But now if we have to go up the budget and everything has to go up, and the film commission, all the German bureaucracy, and just drive you crazy. And it make me feel, what's the purpose of me making art here if I'm just killing my own creativity doing all this paperwork? And I don't know when was your last film, and have you experienced this kind of challenge of your filmmaking?
When I did my German boyfriend, I got a lot of people to work for me who I was really surprised that they were going to do work with me, but they said at the time it was just for fun. They found it interesting to spend a day on my film set and to do these weird fun things. And I think back then it was different. I think today it's harder to have that kind of just casual free time. I think it's more difficult because more people need to spend more hours just working to pay the rent. But back then people had more free time. My current project that I'm still kind of working on, it's also just for fun. So it's working with someone else who is also an artist. And so he also is just interested in the artistic aspect of it. He's not in it for the money at all, right?
Mm-hmm. And how was I found when I was because I just watched my German boyfriend again today, I feel it's kind of a very this style is so unique, and somehow when I was watching it, and I just confirmed, oh, it was made in 2001, but it very much look like a imitating vintage kind of film. It's like 2021. You're trying to imitate where shooting look like a film shot in 2020. 2001. That was very interesting for me. And so I wonder if does our audience have any question already? You can type into the chatting box, or if you have any question from YouTube, you can already our manager can bring it up here. Otherwise, I have my last question, because both of you has also worked as curator, and actually also including myself. And nowadays, when we curate films, and looks like the topic, as we have been talking for almost an hour about identity politic, and we seems like the racial issues has been noticed with movements such like Black Lives Matter and Stop Asian Hate. And do you feel it is another sort of hashtag trend, and people will forget after a few months, or it is something that we can really make a change of the system, or in another word, as artists, as filmmaker, how can we do something to keep this energy and insist not just a hashtag trend, but keep the energy to really make change with our work and to the society?
Yeah, I think it's one of the, I mean, it was good and bad. One of the good or bad things that came out of COVID. Well, the bad thing is the rise of anti-Asian hate. You know, as we know that COVID was blamed on China by Trump, and then kind of just went through the rest of the world like a bad virus, like COVID. And with racist incidents against Asians, violence against Asians increasing in not just in the US, but everywhere, here in Holland as well, and I think in Germany. And I think we cannot, when things go back to normal and everything is back to normal, we mustn't forget what happened here. That actually we thought we were so progressive, and that we had made such gains in you know, being accepted as a part of society. But then when, you know, as we say, the chips are down, like what happened with COVID, as soon as someone points the finger, you're the target again. And so those gains are easily lost. And I think that we have to be very careful to, as we go forward, to learn lessons from what happened with all these, with the rise of anti-Asian hate. And I don't think it's going away. I think it just uncovered things that were hiding. And now they're out again. It's like, you know, the monster is out again. And how do you get it back, you know, into the door? So for us, at least what I'm actively doing is for me, my work with our festival to try to basically put Asian stories, Asian faces, bring people together, bring community together, that, you know, to show people what Asians really are, what are our stories, who we really are, how do we do that? You know, also as filmmakers and curators and so on, we try to bridge that gap and try to put our voices and our faces to be seen and to be heard. And that's always what the very basic thing I was taught from my mentor, Linda Mabalot, who was one of the founders of Los Angeles Asian Pacific Film Festival. She told me, Doris, this is why we do these things, why we have a film festival, why we make content, why we make work, is so we can exist. Because if we are not seen, if we're not heard, we don't exist to the majority. Let's say, when you're seen, when you're heard, when they know your story, then you are part of the society at large. So I brought her kind of teachings with me to Europe, and that's kind of the fundament of what I started Cinemasia with. And I hope to continue doing this work with the festival to just try to put more Asian stories, voices, and faces out there.
Wing?
Yeah, I think also, both of your festivals, I think, and I've also done this kind of work as well, is about helping the next generation develop their voices, right? So I know that the Beijing Festival also invited beginners to make their very first videos and gave them the training and the workshops to do their first videos. Cinemaser does that in Amsterdam as well. And I've also done such workshops in Vancouver and in Hamburg to get new voices to present different stories from their different points of view. So I think that diversity is really important. And it's for me as an older artist, it's about mentoring as well to help the next generation to broaden the horizons and broaden the palette of available stories.
Great. Now we already have one audience want to ask question. Pei, I see that you raise your hand.
Yeah.
Could you unmute yourself and now ask question?
Yeah, thank you so much. Firstly, I'd like to thank Popo and any other in this room for this very inspirational conversation tonight here in Germany. I currently study film studies here in Frankfurt in Germany, and I'm also organizing a small student group here in Germany, especially for Asian queers in Germany, and try to make some representations, proper representation for Asian queers here in Germany, especially for Chinese students, as well as a lot of people here, no matter they work in Germany or live in Germany because of the marriage or something else. So it's a very, very good chance for me to be here with you guys. And I have a very quick question regarding to my personal experiences on filmmaking, because I did also something like the filmmaking on such topics, and I would like to ask some of you here, how can you manage or balance the gap between someone called conventional representations in the case of filmmaking, like sometimes in order to make an Asian queer identity more visible in the film, so you cannot ignore some of the Chinese culture elements by constructing a narrative or characters and so on. But sometimes these elements, this Chinese cultural elements are exactly the things the Western media try to use to make stereotypes about us. So sometimes I'm being very, very confused, such as I plan to make a queer film like representing Chinese queers in my film, but I don't know how to make a proper representation on that, because sometimes you use kind of like the red lantern or something, and also something like the clothes or any mimic on the characters, but sometimes it will be very weird that for people here in Germany, like some Chinese students, they saw this film and they say, oh, this not the Chinese queer film I liked, because you just represent something from the Western media, like how they present us and how they just make the fake representation about us. So this question is confusing me all the time. So I would like to ask you guys some maybe you have some different opinions or some experiences about this things. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to be authentic and honest to yourself. So if you have a red lantern in your room and it's part of your life, then put it on the screen. That's fine. I don't think we really should be thinking about what white people think. I don't think we're making this work necessarily for white people. And I don't want to privilege the white audience that way. I think we really need to think about who we're speaking to first. So for me, especially in a lot of my earlier work, I saw my audience in a series of circles. The innermost circles was the queer Asians. And they were the ones who would get 100% of what I was saying. And then the next circle out was non-Asian queers. So they would maybe get 80% of what I was saying. And then the next circle out was just the mainstream, right? Anyone who's not queer and not Asian. And they would maybe get 60%, but hopefully it's a good 60%. Because I don't really want to put straight white people at the center of my audience and try to convince them through my work that, oh, we are good people. I think if they manage to get something out of my story, then that's good for them, fine. But they are not my main target. They're my main concern. Doris?
Yeah, I think, yeah, indeed, like what Wayne said, you shouldn't think about what other people want. Like it's more important what you want to show them, because that's what they want to see, actually. And I think, yeah, that's maybe in the beginning, in the early days when I started filmmaking, I was very concerned about pleasing all kinds of different audiences. Like, oh, I have to, make sure it's, like this or like that. And then you really forget about sometimes what you want to express or what you want to say. So yeah, I mean, but you should definitely just, even if you not care about what anyone else might say, but go for what you really want.
I would also like to add something. I think a lot of the symbolic things you said also really depend on context. So really, it will be really different to how, even there is a red lantern in the film, but it would be really very different if you hang it on the street or hang in someone's house or hang in a restaurant or hang it in a Chinese restaurant, in a Thai restaurant, in a German restaurant. Has very different meaning, and also a lot of time also depend on who use it. And I recently also confronted by someone saying I'm what do they say? Exoticized Asian culture, but I think somehow it is really the boundary is so difficult to say what is exoticizing Asian, or if there is Orientalism, there is also Orientalism. It's another totally could be another term, and but as Wing and Doris said, if you feel it is important for you to use that red lantern, and then why not? And I think because now it's already later than 11 o'clock, and I don't know if any of you have something more to share. And I forgot to ask what recently happening in your creativity world. What kind of new work are you guys working on now? Do you want to share to us?
I'm working on a feature film that I've been working on for many years already, about a Asian violinist prodigy who was a famous young child prodigy violinist who, as an adult, kind of loses her gift, her musical gift, and she kind of gets a job at a second-rate festival orchestra in Amsterdam and meets a Dutch woman, and they start a relationship. And then it's like her first sexual, it's like her first time that she's had any kind of freedom, including sexual freedom. And it turns out that her lover disappears. And then when she tries to go find her, she ends up only finding the father. and then the father tells her something, and that makes her end up staying with the father of her lover, actually. And then the story actually is more about how this Asian woman becomes, in a way, a surrogate daughter to this Dutch guy living in the provinces, very religious Christian guy, and how they kind of develop a father-daughter relationship, despite how it all came about. That's kind of, I don't want to give too much away, but that's kind of in short what it is. And yeah, I think it was in the same kind of program that Popo was in with Gagalala earlier last year. So that's what I'm working on.
Cool. Really look forward to it. And when what are you originally working on now?
I'm working with a photographer, doing photographies and interviews as concerns about, it concerns getting older for both of us. But for me, particularly as an Asian man getting older, because it's something that is not really discussed that much so far in the scene. There's still a lot of focus on young men in the gay Asian scene. And so Asian gay older men tend to be kind of invisible.
Great. And I think this topic needs to be talked more in the society, in the queer world, because we also hosted a panel in Beijing Queer Film Festival last year about the elderly LGBT, and inviting panelists who are familiar with the topic. And for me, myself, I also have a small advertisement that I'm co-creating a queer Asian film festival called Imagining Queer Bandung, and starting on 23rd of June. And we are showing Doris' film Taxi Stories as the opening film, and plus a small DJ gig and some snacks, and Doris will also be enrolling with us for the Q&A. But unfortunately, the ticket, actually, we are so happy that the ticket was sold out today. But unfortunately, we won't be able to have more of you in the audience. But there are more screenings to go. I just dropped the links of the events to the chatting box. And or you can just search BBUG or Cinema Transtopia on Google, and so you can find their website and see the event. I hope to see some of you there because it is very important for us to visit cinema now. Really exciting, and no matter online or on site. So thanks very much for both filmmakers attending this Q&A. And remember that we still have 5 days to go. You can still watch the short movies, Red Light, My German Boyfriend, Beer, and The Last Lesbians on Montage Play. So don't miss your chance. And thanks Montage Play also for hosting us. Okay. Good
Thank
night.
you guys so much. Thank you for organizing Popo. And thank you, Guo and your team for everything. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.